We are back with Larry Reed here, and we are stepping into the concept of innovation and how core this element is to the entrepreneurial experience. And really, when we think about the intersection between innovation and economic engine, the economic machine moving in the world, it's very difficult for that economic machine to move forward and to continue the cogs churning if there's not a continual stream of innovation taking place. And I think we have multiple experience over the last century in other parts of the world where we can see where that economic engine has almost ground to a bit of a halt because of certain policies and ideas. So when you think about the need of the entrepreneur, the entrepreneurial vision, the requirement of both liberty and an environment where liberty exists for innovation to flourish, what are some of the things that come up for you?
Entrepreneurship is critical to this whole process. Innovation is basically what entrepreneurs do the great majority of the time. There's very little that we use today as consumers that is brand new, based on no previous product or skill, and just appears out of nowhere. Almost everything that we use is a innovated version of something that came before. And as long as entrepreneurs are free to innovate and to enjoy the rewards that often, but not always, come from innovation, depending on consumers and their desires, as long as they're free to innovate and keep those rewards, they will keep doing it. So it's a critical dynamic element in a free economy. An economy that is no longer innovating is, by definition, a stagnant economy. And then you have to ask the question, why would an economy stagnate? Why would people see opportunities but not act upon them? Why wouldn't they issue a new and improved version if there was some money in it for them? Well, the answer to that invariably is because the political authorities have stuck their nose in the way and by various measures make it impossible or too costly or too punishing for entrepreneurs to innovate. So they just quit. They just stop doing it.
Yeah, without the lack of incentive. And so I think that, innovation to me is around thinking, but the reason that thinking exists for people to desire innovation is generally because of a problem that exists. Problems are the best cause of innovation. There's something that's in your way that you need to remove from your way,
Yeah.
and whether it's the problem of my digital camera is too big and how can we fit a digital camera into this technology device that I can also communicate on, and how can I take my computer that used to be the size of my entire desk and put it into this little box that I can carry in my pocket. There's all these things that exist. How
Wow.
can I go on the airplane and put on these noise canceling headsets so I don't hear the crying baby because there's a problem where I can't enjoy my long flights anymore? All of these little things that begin to create the most impressive innovations that have ever existed on the planet and will yet to exist that we don't even know about.
Oh, yes. In fact, Richard, why don't I take a moment here to give an example, an extreme example, but because it's extreme, it's one that's easy for people to understand, that actually came from the pages of history during the Great Depression, which we just ever so briefly talked about. This is an example of government attempting to stand in the way of entrepreneurs, and if it had succeeded, it would have crushed innovation. And that was a measure that Franklin Roosevelt proposed to the Congress. He wanted, this would be about 1937, give or take a year, he proposed a top marginal income tax rate of 99%. And that was defeated in Congress because a lot of congressmen said, who's going to invest if they reap a reward by serving the consumer, and Mr. Roosevelt takes 99 cents of every dollar? Well, it got worse because Roosevelt was so miffed that Congress didn't give him that he came back and by executive order, he imposed a 100% tax rate on all incomes over $25,000. Now, can you imagine that? You're an entrepreneur. You come up with an idea. It requires taking some risk, accumulating some capital, making some investments that might go sour. And along comes the federal government that says, well, don't make more than $25,000 because if you do, we're going to take all of it. Well, that didn't fly. Congress intervened and rejected that executive order, repealed it. That's an example. Governments every day of the week, all over the world, are putting roadblocks and barriers in the way of risk-taking innovators. And often they do it by vilifying those innovators ahead of time, calling them the rich elites. And, we got to make sure they don't make too much money. Well, that sort of thing has taken one civilization after another and just crushed it by driving entrepreneurs to someplace else or some other more sterile activities.
Well, one of my best friends, Jason, he likes to say that money will go to where it's well respected. Coincidentally, your experience of that scenario with FDR is interesting because at present time of this recording, we have a particular federal government in Canada that is imposing a lot of, maybe not to that degree, but it certainly feels like the general population would concur that it feels like there's that oppressive nature of stemming the ability for innovation to occur. And we're seeing it happen where businesses and people with capital are moving. They're transitioning to the United States, or they're moving to other countries, or they're looking at doing business endeavors elsewhere and actually moving their money out of Canada because of these constraints upon their ability to take what they've done, what they've worked with, what they've tried and created. And some have failed and some have succeeded. But that is the price of risk. You don't know for sure what the outcome is going to be, but if you know for sure if your outcome is good, that everything good that you create is going to be taken away from you, it does pull the incentive to innovate away quite quickly.
Oh, yeah. And it's, I think, further notable that so often these confiscatory, punishing measures are being put in place by people who themselves have never been entrepreneurs and wouldn't know how to be one.
There's something about the spirit of the United States. It's well known and regarded as a place where ideas can thrive. The Industrial Revolution, the technological revolution, if to a large degree, the technologies and the things that we use and often take for granted on a daily basis. I held up my cell phone as an example. These things were first pictured in someone's mind and then had to become reality.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like it was just an overnight thing that they built the iPhone. No, an idea had to be created. The idea had to be implemented. It took years and capital and R&D, a lot of investment to go and create the thing, to even determine, you had to have the product available before you could even determine if the market wanted it. So all that's the risk that someone's going and taking in. And not all those ideas work out. They're not all home runs, but there are certain ones that show up and then they shine drastically. So for people to recognize and think about that, if you were to put it into context as a global traveler, someone who's been to 6 continents, close to 100 countries, you've experienced the life and the feeling of the boots on the ground people in other nations. What is it that you see when you go to a nation that hasn't created the environment for innovation to thrive in comparison to one that has?
One of the things I noticed right away in such places, whether it be behind the old Iron Curtain or even more recent examples of countries where governments are all over the place, regulating, mandating, issuing orders, acting as roadblocks in the way of innovation. One of the things I see is a dispiritedness. I see so many people who are just sort of down about life, because they have no hope, because they haven't seen any change or much of it in their lifetimes. They don't see the opportunity to make change without taking too great a risk and not being able to enjoy the rewards if they succeed. So they just kind of give up. Where you see an entrepreneurial, which is another way of saying a free economy, those two things go together. You see life, you see color, you see activity, you see hope, you see people who are coming up with ideas all the time. And, that's what makes the dynamic free economy so attractive to people, because it gives them reason for hope, gives them opportunities that they don't have where the government controls things. I look back at early American history, really for much of our history. Even today, we still have plenty of examples. Some of the fantastic people who came out of nowhere and became very highly successful entrepreneurs, often with having failed several times at it first. Have you ever heard of the guy named the Ice King? His real name was Frederick Tudor. His father offered Frederick Tudor a free Harvard education. And Frederick turned it down because he came up with this idea. This is like 1810. He came up with this idea that people in the Caribbean have never experienced ice. And so he thought, I can cut blocks of ice out of ponds in Western Massachusetts and put them on boats and take them down to Cuba and other Caribbean countries and sell it and become very rich at giving people ice in hot places. Well, he tried that. He failed miserably, went bankrupt, but he never gave up. And before long, by the 1820s, he had become an ice millionaire. He figured out how to take like 180 tons of ice on a ship carved out of ponds in Western Massachusetts and ship them 16,000 miles away to Calcutta, India, and still have enough of it left when it arrived that it could be sold at a profit. And this is the guy who in their right mind would have said, I'd like to invest in that. Well, Frederick Tudor figured it out. And only in America at that time could you really make a fortune by failing a few times, but having a dream and sticking to it. And American history is full of that. That's what free societies are all about.
With that in mind, we're going to get back to the message of hope in the future of innovation when we come back after these messages.